Good evening, everyone. Blessed be and welcome back to Readings at the Witching Hour. I am your host, Aries Starwind, and this is Witches Connected. So last night we began reading Wiccan Beliefs and Practices by author Gary Cantrell. This is a fantastic book. The full name, With Rituals for Solitaries and Covens. We started in the very first chapter, Definitions. And we're going to just jump right back into it. There's a lot of... before I stopped reading and decided I wanted to record this and, share it with everybody, I think this was actually the last section of the first chapter that I was reading. And there was a lot of good information in it, and I'm excited to share it with everyone. So we're going to go ahead, jump right back into it. Definitions. Next section is, what does Wicca really embody? Wicca is a religion rooted in the mists of Neolithic history. By whichever name you choose to call it, Wicca, the old religion, witchcraft, or the craft of the wise, it is basically a fertility and agrarian religion. It is a religion of nature worship and the subsequent interaction with nature that is descended from the practiced by the Celtic clans of Western Europe and the indigenous peoples of the British Isles, the builders of such monuments as Stonehenge. The basics of what we call Wicca can be found in the pantheons and theologies of both the Celts and British Islanders. Wicca, by that very definition, is thus an Anglo-European pagan religion. And I, meaning this is from the author, I personally feel that it is impossible to have a Wiccan tradition such as Egyptian Wicca, Buddhist Wicca, or North American Indian Wicca. While the Egyptian, Buddhist, and North American Indian religions are obviously pagan religions in their own right, they cannot be part of the Wiccan tradition of paganism. That is not to say, of course, that one cannot extract elements of Wicca and somehow merge them with elements of something like Buddhism. I support that could be done, but such a conglomeration, even though it may be meaningful to its adherents, could not in reality be called Wicca, since the theological concepts would in probability be too far removed from Wicca as the rest of the Wiccan population understands it. Just a few more words need to be said about the origin of Wicca. Although there is no question that Gerald Gardner should be credited with bringing our religion into the public eye in the 20th century, he did not invent Wicca. It would be more correct to state that Gardner rediscovered it, or possibly reinvented it by developing the tradition that bears his name, Gardnerian Wicca, from which many of the present-day myriad Wiccan traditions may have themselves evolved. Gerald Gardner, Aleister Crowley, and Margaret Murray have all made an incredible contribution to the revival of the Wiccan religion as it exists today, and their part in our evolution must never be forgotten. The religion we know as Wicca was already thousands of years old before any of these contributors came on the scene. It is true that it was probably not called Wicca 5,000 years ago. I am sure the rites and rituals practiced then were somewhat different from today's counterparts, but the religion we Wiccans practice as the dawn of the 21st century is indeed rooted in the earliest religious observations of our Neolithic ancestors. It is essentially the same age-old religion, observing the same nature-driven ritual holidays and recognizing the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. It is the same now as it was then. As we discussed earlier, the definitions associated with our religion can be somewhat dependent on who asks. Our religion is changing day by day. It is growing and expanding, which sometimes brings growing pains. There are many practitioners who have spent most of their lifetimes learning the intricacies of the craft, studying for years before they would dare assume the mantle of witch, and who sometimes feel the old ways are being ignored and shunted aside by a new breed of practitioner. To a certain extent, this feeling may have some merit. There are probably too many boilerplate instruction books available on Wicca and witchcraft that take little or no time trying to impact what it means to be Wiccan. They jump instead directly into the mechanics of how to be a witch, with no regard for the responsibility and understanding that must be inherent in that mantle. As Wiccans, we acknowledge the worship of the old gods and goddesses in a form both pleasing to them and meaningful to us, and do so in a form that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years regardless of the tradition of the practitioner. We do not want to change the basics of that worship, because they are at the heart of what it means to be Wiccan. Once you step out of that philosophy and develop a path of worship that fails to address those basics or subverts the old methods, you are no longer practicing Wicca. You may be practicing a pagan religion and working some form of magic, but you are not practicing the old religion. You are not practicing Wicca. Even given the somewhat diverse definitions of Wicca, we can still make the following general statements regarding the fundamental tenets that are at the heart of the religion with some degree of certainty. The religion of Wicca, the old religion, is a loving and peaceful religion of nature or earth worship. It is tied to the phases of the moon, the seasons of the year as defined by both lunar and solar astronomical events. It is oriented generally toward agrarian fertility celebrations and recognizes both a female goddess and a male god as equal deities. Wicca is a spiritual awakening within oneself, recognizing the interrelationship between humankind and nature. It is first and foremost a veneration of the Lord and Lady, a deep and abiding understanding of the natural order of things, and an awareness of the religious and cultural significance of our special holidays. Only after all this is Wicca concerned with spells, magic, and the arts of divination. Wicca teaches us that the goddess and god are equal and exist together in each and everything on this earth, including ourselves, so that we are part of the god and goddess just as they are part of us. We and our deities are all linked together as part of the life force of cosmic energy that flows through all things, both animate and inanimate. The witch becomes in tune with this force, this energy during rituals. It is the same force we tie into and manipulate for the creation of positive personal change through spells and magic. Wicca is a religion based on harmony with nature, all aspects of God and goddess divinity. It is a veneration of our earth. We understand that our world is in the midst of an ecological disaster in the making, and that our atmosphere and our water have been polluted to the extent that major expenditures of effort and money are now required to even begin to repair the damage. Fortunately, some steps are being taken to stop the destruction of the ozone layer and to decrease the emission of greenhouse gases that causes global warming. This does not mean the ecological battle is over. Far from it. Since the damage already done to our atmosphere and oceans will take years, if not centuries, to repair. While there may not be any immediate solutions to those problems, they are issues of which we as pagans and Wiccans must acutely be aware. We understand are in tune with the seasons, the natural order of changes in nature and in the universe. We recognize that death is part of life, just as night is part of day, and that storms and monsoon rains are needed just as much as the warm spring mists and dry summer days. You cannot have one without the other. This concept of balance is carried forward in our understanding of the balance needed between male and female, and our belief that our god and goddess are always equal, even though one or the other may tend to dominate in some rituals. Wicca is a peace-loving religion that exemplifies joy and harmony with all the manifestations of nature. We understand and recognize the relationship of humankind to the natural order of all things. We recognize divinity in everything both animate and inanimate, and embrace the god and goddess equally in perfect love and perfect trust. Wicca has its roots in a pre-industrial fertility of nature-oriented agrarian religion, and the seasonal festivals of other working meetings of witchcraft typically coincide with either the solar or lunar cycles of nature. These festivals and meetings, generally referred to as the Sabbats and Esbats, are fully discussed later in Chapter 4. The next section in the first chapter of definitions is a Wiccan philosophy. Now, I find this section to be very, very important. This is, you know, a good start for many people who are just becoming interested in the craft, and this is, something, a very important piece of literature that I think should be definitely read before starting. So we'll get going. A Wiccan philosophy. What is a Wiccan's basic belief? Having previously made the case for Wicca being an esoteric, multifaceted, almost an ethereal concept, can we even answer this question? There may not be a single answer, but I believe, this is coming from the author, but I believe we can at least address it. First of all, you must understand that how I define Wicca is based on the teachings and practicings of my own tradition. I am not implying that the thoughts and concepts in the following paragraphs are universally held by all Wiccans. In general, though, I believe you will find that most of the basic material being discussed herein is generally accepted in some form by the mass majority of those who practice Wicca. You also need to understand that our religion is not specifically a goddess religion. It is a nature religion keyed to the natural order of events that is somewhat goddess-oriented, due primarily to the unique position of the female in the earth cycle. We understand that obviously both male and female components are necessary for reproduction, but we also recognize the special place of the female in that cycle. When we discuss the Wiccan Sabbats later on, you will see that the goddess is the dominant entity throughout all spring and summer rituals, with the god coming into prominence for the rituals of fall and winter. But even in those late celebrations and rites, the goddess element is still present. Like most religions of the world, the pagan religions also have their own creation stories, those in the beginning stories that differ markedly from one pagan religion to another. Although many similarities exist, there are significant differences between the creation stories of Buddhists, Native Americans, and Wiccans. And within the Wiccan religion, there are differences between the creation stories of the various traditions. If there is a basic creation story embedded in most traditions of Wicca, it might be something as follows, and it does not differ that much from the basically accepted facts of evolutionary science. Generally speaking, we accept the fact that billions of years ago, according to the astrophysical sciences, the entire universe was created in one split second by what is generally referred to as the Big Bang. This violent explosion of matter and antimatter expelled gases and dust particles at phenomenal speeds in all directions, a process that continues even today. As the eons passed, many of these particles of dust and stellar matter condensed and coalesced into larger and larger objects, finally forming into a multitude of stars and planetary systems. On many of these planetary systems, life began. As Wiccans, we each have our own traditions and views of this process and how life as we know it evolved. But I believe many of us consider that this Big Bang concept may have evolved from something similar to the ultimate cosmic orgasm between God and Goddess, eventually giving birth to every element and component of our universe. As time passed and life developed on a myriad of planets, it universally exhibits the balance and equality of male and female that is personified by the God and Goddess. On planet Earth, those early forms began to recognize and accept the balance and divinity that is personified by what they choose to identify as nature. The male and female balance was recognized by the most primitive of emerging life forms, and the acceptance of nature as a manifestation of the God and Goddess divinity began to emerge as a driving force in all sentient beings. As time progressed, our ancestors moved out of their Paleolithic caves and built villages and cities, and they worshipped the God and Goddess as they saw them existing in all things. They saw nature as continuing year by year, ever renewing. This then could have been the beginning, the creation of what we today call our Wiccan religion. From these basic concepts came the image of life ever dying to be reborn, that which we understand as our wheel of the year, and that which we identify as our mysteries. The concept of the wheel of the year is woven into the fabric of most traditions. Simply put, it is our calendar that defines the dates of our Sabbath rituals and shows those rituals to be repeating year after year eternally. The wheel tells us that the Wiccan year begins on the Sabbath of Yule, when the goddess gives birth to the god. The god grows strong through the spring and summer Sabbaths of Ostara and Beltane. When the god and goddess unite and the goddess becomes pregnant with the new god, the god begins his response through the fall Sabbaths of Lugnisara and Meba, finally dying on Samhain to be reborn on Yule, and the cycle begins again. Interwoven with the wheel of the year are the mysteries, those innermost parts of the theology of each tradition that make it unique and special to its followers. The mysteries are an integral part of each Wiccan tradition, defining each and every one. They are a cynical part of the wheel of the year, the cycle of nature, and they are the things novices learn as the tradition is studied, defining their Wiccan heritage and shaping their future. The concept of Wiccan mysteries is discussed even more detail later in Chapter 4, although in a rather generic sense. Since this book has been written essentially to cut across traditions and be as non-traditional as possible, I will leave it to the reader to identify, understand, and learn independently those things that form the mystery of your chosen tradition. This concept of the eternal circle of all things is at the heart of Wiccan philosophy, because it exemplifies our belief that all things must continue and that there must eventually be balance in all things. There can be no spring without winter, no rain without sun, no day without night, and no life without death. The wheel of the year and the mysteries show us that in all aspects of his existence are cyclical and repeating, never to end, everlasting and eternal. We thus recognize the existence of a supreme creator or creatrix, from which all things that Wiccans hold sacred have sprung. We believe that everything was created by an entity we call the One, which is the primal and identifiable essence of the ultimate existence that is almost beyond comprehension, and is at the heart of everything we identify as the spiritual beginning of us all. We perceive the One to be composed of equal elements of both male and female, which is personified as the goddess and god divinity that bring the concept of balance to all we know as nature. The goddess and god are knowably and generally within our reach, yet still beyond our real understanding. Their essence is always present in all things, in the sky, fields, streams, rivers, trees, flowers, and in all of us. We are and have always been part of the goddess and god, and they are and have always been a part of us. So I think that was an excellent piece of the chapter. Let's see, definitions. We do have one more section left, but I do want to save that one because it's actually a little bit more, it's not too lengthy, but it's a little longer, and I don't want to go too long in this segment. But yeah, I think that was a very important segment of the first chapter in definitions. And you know, if you ever do get a chance to get a hold of this book, definitely this is definitely one of those parts you want to read a couple times, or you can always go back in this video and listen to the audio and really think about what it's saying, because it's very important. And again, only once or twice did it only mentioned it, but it also mentioned the importance of knowing this history before you even delve into any thoughts of spell work and performing your own magic. It's very important to know exactly the history of where it came from and the powers that it really holds, and where these powers come from. The god and goddess and the all divine, the one we like to call the One. And another very interesting aspect is we get a lot of questions about our beliefs in the creation of the world. And I personally feel 100% in agreement with what they would call the Big Bang. But I like how he put it when he called it the cosmic orgasm. I think that's a very interesting way to put it, but it does make sense because, it takes a male and a female entity to reproduce, not just a male and not just a female. And it does make sense that, both of those entities came together to create that, again, cosmic orgasm. So yeah, I definitely can't wait to continue this tomorrow night. We have one more section in the definitions, and we'll get through that tomorrow night. But I hope everybody enjoyed the reading tonight, and I will see you all tomorrow. And blessed be, have a fantastic evening, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great, great night.